Hello, and welcome to another episode of Fundy Tidings. I'm your host, Jay Remer, and with me today is Blair Hyslop. Blair is the co-CEO of Mrs. Dunster's, as well as the chair of Greener Village's Thrive campaign. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So this is a very exciting initiative that is taking place here in the province, dealing specifically with food insecurity. And so you're doing this with Alex Boyd, who is the CEO of Greener Village, and many people don't know what Greener Village is. So could you explain a little bit about what Greener Village is all about and how it intersects with this campaign?
Sure, happy to do that. So Greener Village, you know, what most people would think of is a bit of a food bank. They're feeding 2,000 families a month with food baskets and doing that kind of work. They have a multi-acre facility just outside of Fredericton, and in addition to the food boxes that they put together for families in need, they have a retail store, a thrift store where people can go in and clients can go in and buy clothing and dishes and other things they might need for their households. They have a teaching kitchen with a Red Seal chef who teaches families how to cook and how to prepare food, maybe using the food that they're getting in their boxes or otherwise. They have a couple of greenhouses there where they're growing food to have fresh sort of local food available to their clients. They also have they're growing their own honey there, and they have a beekeeper there, and then they have community gardens as well. So they're kind of a holistic approach to trying to solve some food security issues already that exist in the community. And then, you know, the idea of the Thrive campaign is we're attempting to raise $6.5 million to build what is essentially the first perishable food recovery center in Canada. So the idea is that they will be able to take in large donations of fresh perishable food. You know, the example they often use is you get a truckload of carrots delivered to the food bank, which is an actual experience that they had last year. And, you know, well-intentioned, but how does a food bank deal with a truckload of fresh carrots and 50-pound bags of carrots? They really need 1-pound bags or half-a-pound bags. So then, you know, they need to repackage that into some format, and they need to do that before it goes bad. So the idea of the Fresh Food, Perishable Food Recovery Center is that they'll have a triage center where they can triage fresh food when it comes in, whether it's meat or whether it's produce or whatever it is, and determine the shelf life and the quality of it, and then decide what their options are. Their option might be to repackage that into, you know, more appropriate sizes for distribution that week, or it might be to put it into the kitchen, which we're going to build, and slice and dice it and freeze it. So we're going to build a kitchen, a triage center, a cold storage, and frozen storage. So we might be able to slice and dice the carrots, for example, and put them into the freezer and save them for another day. Might be able to turn them into soup, might be able to put them into a casserole, portion the casseroles, put them in the freezer, and then in New Brunswick, we have an amazing distribution supply chain for food banks. So there's a central warehouse in Moncton called Food Depot Alimentaire that distributes to the 68 food banks in the province. And so they have trucks going to these food banks full and coming back empty. So when they stop at Greener Village, they'll be able to pick up this food that has been recovered and frozen, or whatever the format is, and then put it back into those trucks, and then go back to the central warehouse and redistribute those meals or that product to all of the food banks in the province. So it's a provincial-wide initiative, even though it's going to reside in Fredericton at Greener Village. It is going to supply all the food banks in the province with fresh, nutritious meals and options.
I didn't realize it was going to be province-wide. That's that's very exciting. I'm just trying to think of how did you come about becoming interested in this whole food insecurity issue?
Yeah, so you know, I've been in the food business for 30 years, more than 30 years. My wife and I own a food company, Mrs. Dunster's, and you know, if you were to take a look at our values as a company, there's two of those values that intersect are that, we use our superpowers for good. So we believe everybody has superpowers, and you have a responsibility to use those superpowers for good. And we know a lot about food and supply chain and strategy and things like that. So we try to use that to the betterment of our communities, and so you layer that on top of another value that we have, which is that we are leaders at work and in the community. And I always say we're probably the least likely organization to write a check to a charity. We're more likely to do something like this, where we can get interested in an initiative that has value, bring our sort of superpowers to the table, and help raise $6.5 million instead of writing a check for $1,000. And so we try to amplify our impact by getting engaged with charities to help them with strategic planning or governance, or building a business plan, or working with their management team on leadership and these kinds of things. And what we've discovered over the last 10 years is we've been able to help raise more than $15 million for various charities in the province by just helping and getting engaged in what they're doing and amplifying their efforts. So when Greener Village came to us and said, look, we want to do this, it's a big idea, but we need $6.5 million, will you get involved and will you help? And because we have a high profile business, we have the ability to we have a profile in the community that allows us to convene people and get people around the table and have conversations, and it's one of our superpowers, so that's what we're doing.
One of the interesting things about Greener Village, because I needed to do a bit of research on this because I wasn't familiar with it myself. Right. I write a lot about civility, and I'm working on a new book, and I was asking ChatGPT, GTP, to give me an example of some companies in New Brunswick that practice conscious respect for one another, and Greener Village came up twice.
Oh wow. Awesome.
So it must be a great organization to work with, and I think that is interesting in and of itself, because it has a number of volunteers, I believe, that work for it. And the fact that it uses, it teaches people how to use the resources that they provide, I think is important. Is that something that can be scaled also, do you think, as far as being able to supply information and teach people in all of the food bank areas? Is that something that is going on?
Absolutely. I mean, with this project, they've always been a leader provincially and regionally, building greenhouses and a teaching kitchen, and some other groups are doing this, but Greener Village has always been a leader in that sort of space. This is a first of a kind effort in Canada, so they're really a national leader in this, and I'm sure this will be successful because I know it's a problem that needs to be solved, both in terms of the need for the food, but also the fact that truckloads of food are showing up that can't always be used in the most efficient and effective way. So it's a shame if it goes to waste. So I think, they're innovators in this space, and they stand above the rest in that regard. And I think that food banks from all over the country will be going to Fredericton to tour this facility and understand the success that they've had and how it works once it's up and running. Absolutely.
One of the things that that I've noticed is, there's seasonality of crops, and up here it's a fairly short growing season, so you don't have accessibility to certain crops.
Right.
And what I'm wondering is, this project seems like it would fit with a broader redistribution of food in general, where there are pockets of areas where there just doesn't seem to be much food production at all, and these people suffer quite a lot.
Right.
And so is there any thought to how this fits into the whole problem of food insecurity? I mean, obviously it does, but in a broader sense where larger swaths of population can benefit.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it just in the context of the New Brunswick food bank system, there's 68 food banks in the province. Some of those are in big cities that are servicing, Fredericton, Moncton, St. John, for example. But obviously with 68 in the province, there are smaller places like Hampton, New Brunswick, Sussex, New Brunswick, places in northern New Brunswick that don't necessarily have access to the same sort of donor base or quality of product. Now with Food Depot Elementale and the centralized distribution in New Brunswick, that problem has been largely solved on non-perishable food, right? So they can take in, and they do, truckloads of product, cereal and rice and pastas and those kinds of things, canned goods, and they can distribute those efficiently to the 68 food banks. That was a huge leap forward for the food bank system in this province.
I imagine.
Because before it was like whoever's got the best volunteer base gets the most stuff, right? Mm-hmm. But it's more challenging on the perishable food side. So with this, that will allow, again, using that same supply chain working in reverse, allow us to get that food to the far corners of the province. And I'm not sure this project would have been possible without that initial build out of that supply chain through Food Depot Elementale in the first place.
Right. So do you notice an increase in the number of food banks? Because, for example, the food bank here in St. Andrews is maybe it's 10 years old, and there was not a known need for it. And if it hadn't been through a fascinating circuitous route, we may not have a food bank still. Mm-hmm. But now we service 150 families, mm-hmm. which people wouldn't think of St. Andrews particularly as being that needy, mm-hmm. but there must be many other communities in New Brunswick that suddenly are realizing that they face this problem.
Yeah, so I don't know the exact number of food banks, sort of the growth of food banks in the province, but I will tell you that the number of clients being served by the food banks in New Brunswick has exponentially grown in the last 3 or 4 years as food inflation has taken hold and as the economy has changed. And Greener Village is no different. I mean, I think they're serving twice as many clients as they were a handful of years ago. And that's true in St. Andrews, in Kennebecasis Valley, and in the so-called affluent areas of New Brunswick as it is in the areas that are struggling. Mm-hmm. And sometimes, what happens with perishable food in particular is it, as I mentioned with the carrots, it doesn't always come in at a time when it can be redistributed or is necessarily needed. Another example, which would be a great example for the Perishable Food Recovery Center is, everybody donates turkeys at Christmas, right? So all the food banks are getting hundreds and hundreds of turkeys. Well, the reality is maybe they can't use all the turkeys at Christmas. Like, let's say you have 150 clients in St. Andrews and you get 250 turkeys. So what do you do, right? And in some cases, families don't know how to cook a turkey.
Yeah.
Or maybe they don't have an oven.
Right.
Or what have you. So it's not always appropriate. It's well intentioned and it's well received and grateful and all of that. But with a Perishable Food Recovery Center, we can take the excess turkeys and we can cook them and we can break them down and we can turn that into turkey soup. We can turn that into turkey rice casserole with some other products we're getting. We can turn it into turkey sandwiches. We can look at that donation and really utilize it. And then all of a sudden, we're feeding people in March and April and May mm-hmm. with turkeys that were donated at Thanksgiving or Christmas, right? And so, and again, it doesn't matter if somebody donated a lot of turkeys necessarily in Bathurst or if they were all in St. John, because this will level the playing field in terms of our, we'll take them in and turn them into whatever we need to turn them into and put them back into the system.
So, jumping topics slightly, I write a lot about responsibility too. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, where do you see the division of responsibility between the various levels of government, local communities, businesses, and other organizations in dealing with this very serious problem? The thing about this food insecurity that a lot of people don't get, especially people who are not food insecure, mm-hmm. is it's a huge safety element in people's psyche. And if they don't have food, they don't really feel safe for good mm-hmm. reason. And so this initiative is critical to the thriving of any community. I think it can't be taken too seriously. I think it's really bedrock material for a community to be able to maintain itself. And I'm just wondering, where does that responsibility fall? Does it fall with government, or does it fall within the communities, or how does how do you think it would fall most successfully?
Most successfully, yeah. So I would say that, you know, there is, first of all, in terms of this campaign, there's been tremendous support from the provincial and federal government. I think COVID really highlighted with governments the importance of food insecurity and food security and food sovereignty, if you will. You know, in Atlantic Canada, you know, my grandparents probably, when they grew up, maybe 75% of the food they consumed was grown in Atlantic Canada. Today, that'd be less than 6%. So,
is that right?
Yeah. So when and that ties into the availability of food and companies like ours to do things like Bread for School programs. So if the companies don't exist here, they're not doing those local things. Anyway, having said that, what I would say is, and this is what we said at the public launch in a conversation that we had on stage of this campaign was, we all have a responsibility. So there's no they, right? They need to fix this problem. There is no they. There's just us. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, if we'd have taken a back seat and a few others had taken a back seat on this and said, yeah, they should build something. They should do something. Who's they? Mm-hmm. You know, is it government? Well, who in government? Provincial? Who in provincial government? Who in municipal? Like, who are they? There is no they. There's just us, right? So we all have superpowers. We all have a responsibility to use those superpowers for good, and we all have a responsibility to step up and solve that problem, those problems in our communities. That's how we feel about it. There is no innovation department in government. You know, there's no, government's not going to come up with an idea one day like this to do this. But government can support industry-led or community-led initiatives that have merit in kind of doing this. But they need, the success of these initiatives is amplified if they're community-led, because that gives the politicians sort of political air cover. Oh, wait a minute, the community's asking for this, right? It's at least I got, you know, the support of the community. I don't have to go get the support of the community. And it's probably going to be much more successful if it's community-led, right? So, you know, for us, I think that we just believe that we all have a responsibility, and every community has people that do that. You know, you're using your superpowers for good in terms of what you do here to get the message out about Greener Village, to do that, so you're playing a role in that solution, right? Other people have other superpowers. Maybe it's to write a check, maybe it's to, you know, donate some hours, maybe it's to put some roofing tiles on the roof when they start building it. I don't know, but teach people how to cook in the teaching kitchen. So we all have a responsibility. And what Greener Village has done is said, well, our responsibility, and what we're going to do is we're going to build this thing, and we're going to go find some people to help us raise $6.5 million. And that's coming from federal government, provincial government, a half a dozen or more foundations. The McCain Foundation put in $750,000. It's, I think, their second largest contribution they've ever made. The Weston Foundation, others. And then lots of people are writing checks for $50, $100, you know, and we're raising money. And so how did we get it done as fast as we got it done? Wasn't the provincial government alone, or the federal government alone, or Blair Hyslop alone. It was, you know, all of these people coming together and navigating. And I think what people forget is sometimes it's daunting, right? I want to build this thing, but how would I build this $6.5 million perishable food recovery center that no one's ever done before? And what we've discovered is that if you have an idea like that, and once you step out on that idea, there's all kinds of other people who either had that idea or thought it was a great idea, who come out of the woodwork and start supporting it and jump on that bandwagon. You don't have to have all the answers before you step out on it, right? Alex Boyd could have stepped out on this issue and it could have failed on the vine, right? He could have got a little ways down and saw no support. But as he stepped out on the issue, he saw support. As he brought in other people that amplified the message, the more support came. As we continue to have more conversation, more support comes. And I think people sometimes hold back because they don't think they have all the skills to be able to take it across the finish line. But you don't have to. Sometimes you just got to step out on the issue and see, you know, how others can amplify that, right? So we all have a responsibility.
Yeah, you know, I am very impressed with the concept that you bring up of everyone has superpowers, because it's so important for people to believe in themselves and to realize that it's not a hierarchical world that we live in necessarily.
Right.
It's much more of an even playing field, but we don't give ourselves that chance. So I think that that's a really great philosophy to have behind this whole thing. which brings me to the question of how we can be involved as individuals within our communities. What's the best way, or are there several ways for people to become involved? Because I don't think anybody would turn their back.
Right.
And so how do we turn forward and march?
Well, I think, as I said, in terms of this particular issue, every community in this country of any size has a food bank. And so and the need in those food banks is growing exponentially across the country. I don't think New Brunswick's any different, than Winnipeg or Saskatchewan or any of those places. So I think if, showing up and explaining what your superpowers are and asking how you can help. And sometimes people go in and just sort of offer solutions before they understand what the need is, and how they can be used, or maybe sometimes they don't quite maybe explain how they think they could help. But at the end of the day, I think we all can play a role in that. And like I said, it doesn't have to be time consuming. It doesn't have to be a huge commitment. It could be writing a check, dropping off a donation. It could be delivering something. It could be a number of different, could be solving IT problems that they have in terms of tracking the distribution of the food and the clients. And these are businesses it could be teaching a class on how to bake bread. Like, there's 1,000 things. But once you get engaged in that local community, we're a bakery. We make bread and donuts and other things. And so we now, because of conversations, we now have a program for food banks to buy bread at basically cost, because they buy bread, and so so that's through conversations. Say, well, that's kind of one of our superpowers. We make a lot of bread, so we can do that. But doing what you're doing, for example, these things, everybody, the whole notion of superpowers for good, I got to give credit or I'll get in trouble. It was my wife's idea. So as my kids were growing up, they would be very creative and smart and intelligent about trying to, get something over on their siblings, or get out of their homework, or get out of their chores. And my wife would say, that's really creative of you. Why don't you use your superpowers for good? Like, imagine if you were to use those superpowers to do something good instead of, trying to trick your sister into doing something. And so that whole notion sort of started there, and that just became part of the family sort of ethos. And then when we bought Mrs. Dunster's, that became one of our corporate values as well. But I think we can all figure out, how to get engaged and get involved. You just have to step out and have the conversations, and it'll become obvious how you can help.
So, Blair, we just have a couple of minutes left, and I'm just wondering, what are your key takeaways? What do you think are the most important points that people can take away from this discussion?
Well, I'd say a couple of things. One is, we're 92% of our goal on the Perishable Food Recovery Center, which will be a model potentially for the rest of the country. It's important that we do that. So if people want to contribute to the campaign, please reach out online to Greener Village and provide some support there. We're $5.8 million against a $6.5 million target, so we're almost there. And if we can prove that concept, it could show up in communities all across the country, which would be awesome. The other is that, as I said, we all have superpowers, and we have a responsibility to use them for good. And I would say that extends to businesses and corporations and institutions as well. It's not just individuals, right? And we can all make a difference. And projects like this happen because somebody steps out, and other people see that as a good thing and want to be part of it. So, I encourage people to step out.
Well, I certainly thank you for stepping out, because it is exemplary. It's just an amazing project. They're not words to really describe the impact that this potentially has. So thank you for coming on and sharing your thoughts with us. And thank you for watching the show today. Hope you enjoyed it, and I look forward to seeing you again on another episode of Fundy Tidings.